Hello Smashers, I'm back, and we're done with Qualifier 6 for the Class A Championship. A lot of you guys will have seen some of the games from this qualifier on my stream on Twitch. I'll have that linked in the description for this video. As it is, I haven't been streaming that much in the past week, even though I really did want to stream a couple of specific matchups like this matchup and this matchup from the end of this qualifier, because I had family visiting, and on top of that, I got a little bit sick. Not a lot. It seems like it's just a cold, but like if you look at my sleep graph, I had spikes after streams, and then I had a time when I didn't have a spike, and then like a couple days after I started feeling a bit sick, and we've got this stuff going on with the scheduling and this cold. Stuff is just a little bit weird. Once stuff stabilizes a bit more, I actually think I'm feeling a little bit better with the low energy from my broken back. I think I'm going to be stabilizing at a lower sleep level and a higher energy level, but I gotta get fully over this cold first. So I'm doing this video recording before I try to do a stream, because the video recording is shorter, and that'll tell me if, talking for a long time starts to get me feeling like too much of this. So, in any case, I'm already a little bit into Qualifier 7, but Qualifier 6 had some interesting decks in it. First, the overall tenor of this. Qualifier 4 had a lot of draws. Qualifier 5 had some big winners. Qualifier 6 we were back to, again, with a big field. We've got what? This is a 16-deck qualifier. We had a lot of draws and some big winners. So overall, we've got that pattern of having a lot of decks get knocked out in round 3, because a lot of decks end up sitting on 2 and 2 with a couple draws. But overall, we did have a pattern in the winners. There were 2 werewolf decks that made it to 6 and 2, which is a pretty good indication that werewolves are doing pretty well in Class A. So let's start with the decks that didn't make it out of round 2. Magical Girl Ants actually managed to take a win over Princess Spies that surprised everyone on stream, but then they ran into Dragon Pirates and just got beat down. Honestly, Magical Girls are not Class A. Ants are sort of like, on a good day, they can be a Class A deck, but really Ants are probably B in the way I do B, which is, again, my B is probably slightly above average deck. Slightly above average faction is a Class B faction to me. So I think Ants are B, and Magical Girl are maybe B, and this deck was not all that likely to do great. But, it picked up a win against a more legit deck, so it did something. Sinister Sharks went down at 0-4. The deck has synergy, it was just outclassed. Beauty and Obese is going to be pretty good against any sort of minion size capped removal because of the sumo faction, and they're good at putting out a lot of power. Sinister 6 does not like having its opponents having more power in play than it, because that makes it awkward for Sinister 6 to generate base breaks and make sure that they actually win the base. Then in the matchup against Teddy Horses, both of these games were close, but ultimately Teddy Horses turned out to be the better deck. Polynesian Ninjas, I was sort of trying Polynesian out a bit more because it does so well against Knights by denying the movement. But where they really lost? They lost to Avenging Shapeshifters, which is a pretty good deck. They made a draw with Ignoble Wizards. Ignoble Wizards is a good deck, but Ignoble Wizards is primarily a 3-player deck. So these were probably all decks that are just not really Class A decks. Second round. Exploring Critters would have been... third round. Exploring Critters would have gotten eliminated by Beauty and the Werebeast, if not for the fact that once I got 4 decks that made it through to the 4th round, there was literally no way I could pair them up without having either a rematch of an earlier match or a werewolf-on-werewolf action, which I didn't want. But the real story of this red is not that Exploring Critters wasn't great. Exploring Critters is good, and it may come in as a wild card. The real story is Beauty and the Werebeast. First off, my observation at this point about these werewolf decks is the card that really wins games for them when they're in a bit of a tough spot is Moon Touched, and exactly Moon Touched. If they can fill up their hand with some double draws from Moon Touched, pretty much any decent werewolf deck is going to be able to use that to fuel some extra action plays later, just fuel having the right cards to do the right things, and it's going to be able to win a game that would otherwise be close. Beauty and the Werebeast, I think, lost one game by 7 points when it just didn't get a great early hand and Dragon Pirates had a good hand. Other than that, it rolled in games where it got Moon Touched early, and in games where it didn't get an early Moon Touched, well, it was still able to double the Beauty and the Beast talents on top of just being two good factions, one of which is a good aggressive faction. The other one, Werewolves, is a hybrid between aggression and removal, and that combination is just good in this tier. So the story in this match was that Beauty and the Werebeast was good, not that Exploring Critters was not good enough. Beauty and Obese shows up, I think, a pattern that Beauty and the Beast really, while it's nice to have broken synergies, it really does want to have a little bit of minion removal in its partner, because Beauty and the Beast is great at pushing bases towards breaking, generating a lot of plays, cycling through a lot of cards to get the good thing, and having like 2 or 3 removal cards in the partner faction mean that they can get rid of critical enemy Kennedy minions, Kennedy meaning something that you really need to kill, and that makes Beauty and the removal faction a much better deck than just Beauty and the general faction that has something to do with discards. Beauty and Obese can generate lots of power. Overall, it's probably pretty good in 3-player, which is primarily about generating lots of power rather than having lots of power and some removal for utility. But ultimately, Dragon Pirates is just a better 1v1 deck. Avenging Shapeshifters, Teddy Horses. These are decks that can do great things on a great turn. Avenging Shapeshifters works pretty well, because Shapeshifters tend to denude their deck of minions over the course of the game, and Avengers are good at shuffling the minions back in. Teddy Horses are just a couple rush decks that have the fun part of also adding in Cuddle to mess with certain opposing factions. Shapeshifters is a big one. Ultimately, these decks were both decent decks that are not good enough to make it out of a qualifier. Princess Spies felt like it had a terrible case of 1 minion per turn syndrome that wasn't going to lose it game. It wasn't going to get it wiped out in 2 rounds. The minions it plays are good enough to carry some games, even though it's only playing one of them. But once it went up against a decent Werewolves deck, it was not going to be able to survive that, and it just felt clunky. Princess Spies felt clunky throughout this match. They were outclassed in terms of how much stuff can be played in a single turn. On top of that, Werewolf Changers are capable of making sure that on turns where they break a base, that is, in turns where before playing specials they are winning, all their minions are sitting at 5 power or higher that are on that base, which means that the Spy specials actions played from hand do nothing, and all Spies have for specials are Mole. Princesses, now, Someday My Prince Will Come is still a very good special, but that's only 1 copy. Kitty Musketeers, Anansi Elves, both are decent decks. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about these. These are good decks. They're not good enough to make it to the Class A Championship. Hydra Shield, Zombie Knights, I think there's more interesting things to say about this. Zombie Knights is very much sort of a momentum-based deck, and by that I mean having stuff in play lets them do more stuff. By the way, most Princess decks are also momentum-based decks, unless you're throwing in Ghosts or All-Stars. That is, they're going to be leaving power in play. They're going to be able to spread that power out because of their good movement. And if they get ahead on power, they can sort of cascade that forward into breaking. They'll break their second base very soon after breaking their first base if they broke and won that first base. But if they find themselves set behind, it's going to take them a little while to catch back up. They do have extra minion plays from Zombie, to bring stuff back, but a lot of the time, Knights really do want to set up some stuff in play, move their stuff around, get some stuff working, and while Zombie Knights can fight their way out of some bad situations via Knights alternate VP, they don't have any ways to set the opponent back if the opponent is getting ahead. And Hydra Shield just felt a little bit more agile in both games of this match. Hydra Shield is very much a burst from hand kind of deck, which is its self-combo rather than momentum. And a lot of the time, self-combo decks often win the matchup against momentum decks in 1v1 games if it's head-to-head and the decks are kind of equally good at executing their play plans. Because Hydra Shield doesn't have to leave a lot of power in play if the Zombie Knights are already set up, and they can dump their whole hand into breaking critical Knights cards out of play. Usually it's the actions, because the zombie side means that, getting rid of Guinevere just means that Guinevere is going to come back from the discard pile and you didn't accomplish much of anything. Zombie Knights is fun. I think Zombie Knights is probably broken in 3-player. Hydra Shield did prove to be the better 2-player deck. However, in the final round, Hydra Shield came up against Exploring Critters. They were 3-1. They got fed to Beauty and the Werebeast, which won the qualifier. But then we found out that they were, in fact, better than Hydra Shield, who had been 2-2 and got a win over Zombie Knights. Exploring Critters and Hydra Shield played largely the same kind of game, but Exploring Critters did it better. They can burst at the end of their opponent's turn with Explorers, they can burst during their turn with Critters. These two bursts don't conflict with each other, they can do them both effectively on the same turn, because the Explorer burst doesn't use their minion and action plays on their own turn. And you can see the absolute lopsided score that occurred in Game 1. I don't remember exactly what led to that utter and complete destruction, but Exploring Critters has bigger bursts, and I also noticed in this particular matchup, they were able to draw enough cards from I Said No Camels that they had a consistent card supply as well. So it really felt like Explorer Critters was solidly better in both games. You can, however, see a little bit of the fact that both of these are self-combo-oriented decks, where having the right cards that work together is much better than having a bunch of random cards, by the fact that Exploring Critters won by 12 points when it played second, and only 3 points when it played first. That's a big differential in the opposite side from first player advantage, which means that luck of the draw plays a big role in this matchup. Other final round match, Werewolf Changers had narrowly beat Avenging Shapeshifters in both games. Werewolf Changers burst bigger. Avenging Shapeshifters, it's good. It wasn't quite good enough. Ultimately, I think Werewolf Changers is, on the average, just a little bit better at executing a very similar plan to Avenging Shapeshifters. And on top of that, Changer bots are pretty resistant to Black Widow, which I think makes Changer bots a little bit of a plus matchup. Again, if a Changer bot deck is good enough to give an Avengers deck a fair fight by overall faction quality, Avengers are a much better faction than Changer bots. But if you've got an equal matchup in overall faction quality, I think Changer bots have a good Avengers matchup because of the fact that that Bruiser is such a good safe opener to avoid getting set badly back by a Black Widow play that leads to Avengers gaining some big momentum. And in the final, what happened was we had a couple self-combo decks. Huge self-synergy in this deck. Big self-synergy in this deck. Not as big in Dragon Pirates, but the big thing of Dragon Pirates, the idea I had in playing it, was that Dragons has a lot of small minions that you really want to get rid of. Pirates has one specific small minion that you really want to get rid of. An awful lot of successful decks in Class A run a small to moderate amount of removal. There's a lot of pretty good factions that have like 2 removal cards in them or something like that. Well, these factions can deal with First Mates or Imperial Dragons, not with both. And it was just the idea that I want to try to first use dragons to stall in order to line up some first mates, and second, use the combination of dragons and pirates to run the opponent out of removal so that something gets loose and goes crazy and manages to win the game. On top of that, let me tell you, the Kraken on Wyvern is really, really good, because that Wyvern is basically a 7 when it's time to break a base. That has the disadvantage that if you try to play it on the break turn, you're going to have to kill something. But when you move the Wyvern after breaking a base with Kraken, instead of letting it go to the discard pile, you don't have to pay that removal cost at the new base. It's kind of just a 7 waiting to be a 7. So that was what happened in this qualifier. I maybe was a little bit shorter than usual on it, because a number of these deck matchups were streamed, and also because I felt like there were a lot of pretty good decks that there wasn't a lot to say about. They were good enough, but they were not great. I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the last 2 qualifiers. So, Laser at this point has these scans that were leaked on Reddit for the Disney set, so I should be able to start streaming some of the Disney games at some point, or at least I'll be able to play them on Tabletop Simulator, as well as just, being able to play them with physical cards when my set gets in. Right now, I've printed out proxies for just Beauty and the Beast, and also Final Fantasy, which is the Lion King, is the real faction. I'm enjoying Lion King so far. It's fun. I tried Avenging Lion King. That had less synergy. I tried Shapeshifter Lion King. That felt a lot better than Avenging Lions as far as synergy is concerned, because you've got ways to go fetch your doppelganger, put your doppelganger back in your deck, go search for Gelfs. It doesn't matter that Gelfs don't have great targets to look for. They only need one great target, which I forget whether it's Simba or Nala, but the target I'm looking for is called Cloud in the Final Fantasy reskin. It's very, very much like Sleeping Beauty from the Princesses, but it's a printed 4 that gets +2 power if Mufasa is in your discard pile, and then you can shuffle it back to your deck if it hits the discard pile from play. Let me tell you, that card is a real winner if you're able to search for it repeatedly with Lion Cub. And you've got a partner faction that suffers from denuding its deck of minions over the course of the game. Ninja Princesses was, I forget why I wanted to try it, probably just because they're both highly rated factions, and if it wasn't a good enough deck, it would push ninjas down to maybe the rating that they should be at in 2022. I think ninjas and zombies also are 2 factions that used to be a lot better in 1v1 than they are recently, because they do a lot better against momentum-based opposing decks than they do against burst-based opposing decks. And it's sort of, their rating is going to get adjusted a bit back down to the current meta, which favors that. These 2 decks, both good decks. We'll see how they do in future rounds. However, an interesting deck I wanted to talk about is the one where I'm just barely into their first game, and that's Kaiju Inca. Both Kaiju and Inca have been struggling in my games recently. And it's because I found a specific way to mess with each faction when playing against it. The way you beat Kaiju, I think, has been known for a very long time. You wait for Gorgonzola to come out. Gorgonzola gives them their card draw that they need to repeatedly refill their hand. Gorgonzola also gives them a bunch of power counters that makes all their cards hit harder. But Gorgonzola takes a lot of resources to bring into play. You either have to use a few one-of cards to bring it directly into play, or you need to get 2 actions into play and then spend a minion play to play it on the base. So what you do playing against Kaiju is you wait for Gorgonzola to come out and then you swat it with a base break. That's pretty much the anti-Kaiju strategy. And a lot of the time, Kaiju decks, when faced with that strategy, will sort of start to fizzle, and over the course of the game, they're going to find themselves having to use too many of their good actions on bases to set up, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they've got a bunch of cards that would be synergistic with their other cards, except that like one half of each combo is sitting in their discard pile, and the deck sort of slowly stops working. It doesn't always happen this way, but when Kaiju faces a better 1v1 deck, that tends to happen. Now, Inca. How do you mess with Inca? You mess with Inca by recognizing that it has 3 critical actions that allow it to work. Temple of the Sun gives it the card draw to search for its stuff and keep playing stuff. Armory is its only real burst. Like, Armory is the card that will give you a big enough power jump when you play it that you can break bases that were not sitting close to their breakpoint already. And when you play against Inca, you want to try to force the Inca player into situations where they need to commit an Armory to break the base, and sort of try to run them out of armories this way. You won't quite succeed, but you will make their play awkward. And then, of course, if you get a chance to shoot it down an armory or a Temple of the Sun, you do it, and you kind of try to say, I want to set up positions that lose to these 3 cards, and know that my opponent doesn't have enough copies of them. And Inca sort of struggle to set up without leaving too much power in play on their own if they're also going to get full mileage out of their cards that are like self-synergistic. Their Fortress Walls, their Temple, their Child of the Sun. Like, all of these cards tend to encourage Inca to play in one place and then get swatted down with base breaks. And if they can spread out, they can do some crazy things with Golden Condor and some stuff like that, but a lot of the time it's hard for them to get a good spread position without nerfing themselves in the process. Well, so far it appears that while Royal Highway isn't a good enough spread tool on its own, and Llama doesn't feel like that great a spread tool for Incas themselves, Llama is a good spread tool for Kaiju, because what you do is you get Gorgonzola into play, and then you get enough card draw from Gorgonzola to run your deck, and then you drop Llamas somewhere else to evacuate actions with power away from Gorgonzola, because you know your opponent wants to break the base with the Gorgonzola, and so you start moving your actions away from that base, and you're able to get a situation where you draw enough cards from Gorgonzola, and you're building up an attack on a second base at the same time, and you're drawing enough cards that you still have the hand quality, especially from the fact that there's a lot of similar things that both Kaiju and Inca do with a little bit of extra actions, a little bit of cards to 2 card draw. All of those things lead to the fact that if one of the factions runs dry out of a particular kind of card, the partner faction probably has a spare. So it's starting to look, again, I'm like 4 turns into the first game, but it's really starting to look like this particular combination survives the anti-Inca and anti-Kaiju strategies pretty well. And we'll see in the case of Qualifier 7 how that happens. You'll also, of course, start, depending on how much I sleep tonight, depending on when my sleep starts to normalize, and I'm thinking it might start to normalize like down here instead of up here, because I didn't spike after my last stream. You'll start to see me stream some of these Disney matchups, and some of them, like Lion King and Frozen, there's some stuff there that I'm excited to play and excited to show on stream. But for now, that's enough of my summary for how things are going. I think I also plan to do an update in this video showing how some of the deck ratings have moved, but I started recording this video and I completely forgot to record all the results on the place on my computer where my program can read it to generate faction ratings. So I don't have that for you, but suffice it to say that right now Werewolves is currently comfortably overrated because Werewolves is fantastic in A and terrible in S, and so Werewolves is probably looking great. However, there is a summary I can give you. Take a look at the top of the qualifier decks and the wildcard options now. We've seen some Werewolves at the top of wildcard for a while. There's the top 3 wildcards. That is, decks that did not finish top 2 but still did well, are all Werewolf decks. The top 2 decks of qualified decks are Beauty and the Beast. Now, I think I have played the best Beauty and the Beast combos already, but if Beauty and the Beast continues to do well in the Class A Championship and it has a chance to attempt to try to get an S- rating afterwards. That rating would be based on how well its second best deck does in a sort of this specific norm tournament is what I'd call it. This looks like these are going to be the two decks that it's trying to make it with. Although I have a feeling Werewolves will fail hard against true S opposition, so they're still going to want to have a third good partner, but this looks like they've got a decent... They at least will deserve a shot at it. And then we've got some of the other expected stuff from before. The Dragon Knights, Fairy Avengers, those are four very strong factions that I expected to see here. Itty Grimm's, very well-known deck. More Explorers. Explorers are great. Explorers may not be represented so well here, because they're already kind of represented up here in the already seeded decks that did not have to play the qualifiers. But we're seeing a real pattern with both Beauty and the Beast and Werewolves coming to the top here. That's going to be interesting to follow. I do think Lion King has a decent shot at putting some decks into the Class A Championship as well. Nightmare, I've been hearing good things about it. We'll see how it does. It's possible that Nightmare might miss out on as good a rating as it deserves because I don't find the right partners for it, but I'm at least trying. I think it's going to have some good stuff. And when I've doubted factions relative to what the community thought in the past, I've been right sometimes, but I've also been wrong sometimes. I didn't think Werewolves was really Class A material, so that'll be interesting. And, you know, the other factions, Wreck-It Ralph, Mulan, I think most of the other stuff probably isn't A, but they're going to get a shot. We're going to see how they do. I was considering that going to like 24 plus decks in a qualifier. How many is this? This is 56 or 70. This is a 28 deck qualifier. It does look like finishing top 2 out of 28 is an awfully tough call, and it's going to make the winners more elite than they were in the first 6 qualifiers. But I'm also including a bunch of new factions where I don't necessarily know the right partners for these new Disney factions yet. And because of that, I'm going to have more misses, and there's going to be, it's, you know, making it to say 3-1 isn't probably going to require as good a deck in Qualifier 7 as it did in Qualifier 5. Because there's a lot of things where, like, maybe I've got the wrong Mulan partner here. Maybe Aladdin just doesn't belong. Is Mulan's a deck? I don't know. That's Ants T and Mulan. Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. I mean, it is a Beauty and the Beast deck. Beauty and the Beast has been tearing up the qualifiers, but is Aladdin the right partner for it? We don't know. Maybe Aladdin isn't a good enough deck. Ralph and Inca, maybe it's great. Maybe it's not great. Is Orcs the right partner for Nightmare? I don't know. I think they have synergy. I don't know if they're good enough. Ninja Knights, I mean, Ninja, I added this one specifically to have a Knights deck that has removal for Polynesians. Who knows? Cleric Dragons is a good deck. But there's a lot of stuff here where I just don't know if they're going to be good enough. And so because of that, it may be easier for the very best decks to run up the score and get a 7-1 or 8-0 record. Okay, but in any case, I've extended this far enough. I've talked long enough, and I'm going to go ahead and upload this video, and hopefully I'll get back to streaming sooner rather than later and show you guys some Disney matchups for some more decks that are trying to get into this Class A Championship. Happy smashing, everyone! Like, subscribe, and follow on Twitch, because I saved the videos from all the matches I stream on Twitch, even if you aren't able to catch me live. But, of course, I love it when people catch me live, too. Good evening, everyone. Bye.